How are you these days?
I'm fine, except I need a haircut.
So I guess probably you spend most time mostly at home.
That's right. That's right.
And what about the cat? The famous
The
cat?
cats are fine. The cats are fine.
That's
We know that
he or she
there's
need
been
grooming?
cases of cats getting the coronavirus in some places, but apparently they do not pass it back to humans, right?
Does it need some grooming? Because the pet groom shop will be open soon.
No, they manage fine.
So with your view about COVID-19 situation, how would you like to evaluate the way Thai government handling the situation?
Well, I think first of all, to be fair to, in fact, all governments, we are facing an unprecedented situation. There are still, even until today, many unknowns about the disease, the pandemic, and how it's going to play out. So it's quite easy to pick and comment on what should have been done, could have been done. But for Thailand, I think at least the numbers suggest that we must be doing something right, because at least for the last 3 days, we're now down to single digit. So it seems like we have won the first round anyway, as far as the health concerns are. But of course, the problem with the economic side is less rosy. I think we have seen problems, especially with attempts of the government to try to help the people who have lost their income, because the way the system that they've set up, the way they've set up the system meant that it's too complicated and a lot of mistakes in terms of screening. And people will feel that there is also a lot of discrimination because there are so many schemes, and they may feel that they're not getting what they should be getting. So that's an area where there needs to be an improvement, certainly. At the same time, having said that, we are not over the health crisis yet, because there are challenges ahead, especially as we ease the restrictions.
It looks like what is troubling the people more these days is less the pandemic itself, but more the prospect of a continuing economic downturn that would affect their livelihood.
Well, the two issues, I mean, I've said right at the outset, are intertwined. You can't really separate them, because if we, for instance, if we ease the restrictions only to discover that we have a second wave of infection, we'll be back to where we were, and the economy will suffer even worse. At the same time, obviously, if we try to eradicate the health crisis at all costs, you will find that there will be growing public frustration. We've already seen, at least in other countries, protests. And if we cannot get the cooperation of the people, you can't overcome the health crisis either. So the success of the Thai experience so far has been pretty much due to cooperation of the people, the strength of our health system and our healthcare workers, as well as health volunteers. And so we mustn't risk losing all the gains that we've made.
And this is the period that we've been told that we have to adjust to new normal lifestyle or next new normal. Any issue that concerns you regarding new normal?
No, I think people will be anxious to have the restrictions eased. So we are expecting, for instance, that as we move into the month of May, we will have many places reopened. Maybe not everything. Well, obviously not everything. So, for instance, today, I think the BMA has said that you can reopen restaurants, barber shops, and so on. But the new normal, or the new standard that will apply to make sure, or at least to reduce the risk of a second wave of infections, is obviously is going to be new standards. So it still would be more costly for operators. So, for instance, in restaurants, you have to have that social distance being applied. On aeroplanes, you can only sell maybe up to at most 60-70% of the load. So that's something that we will have to adjust to. But I think people will accept that, because if we don't do this, the alternative might be to continue with the shutdown. Quite how long this will go on, obviously, will depend on the availability of vaccines or treatment and how other countries are doing as well.
Now, as former Prime Minister, I'm certainly you understand the mechanisms of the government and all the government agencies involved in the fight against the pandemic. Is there things that we can do more, or do you think that we have done pretty enough to the extent that we can to contain the virus?
There is one area which is still a concern to me, and that is the extent of testing that we've done. I know they've tried to increase or ramp up the number of tests being applied, but it's still low by comparing to other countries. And I think it's pretty much a consensus that if you want to open up, if you want to ease the restrictions, the best protection you can have against a second or third wave of infection is to have extensive testing. We're not doing enough. We're not doing it proactively enough. And I can understand the concerns about the quality of the tests that are available at the moment. I don't think cost is much of an issue, but there continues to be concern about the quality and accuracy of the tests. But I have to say that I think in a situation like this, there will always be remaining risks and uncertainty. And if, for instance, the tests are 80% accurate, let's say, that's a sort of number that's usually being cited. Isn't it better that we know something with 80% accuracy than not knowing at all? So if we do the testing with the caveats in mind that these tests have false positives, have false negatives, maybe up to 20%. We recognize that the rapid test may only detect the virus after the person has had it for maybe up to 2 weeks or even longer than that. If we know the warning on the labels, if you like, then I think we can still make good use of this. Because what we should do is extensive testing and linking it to a tracing app, which is becoming, available, in fact, globally. And that is the only way to make sure that after opening up, should there be people who are infected, we can quickly get a grip of the situation, trace and contain and monitor. And we have a very good system and a very strong system of health volunteers, the OSMO, who've done a tremendous job of helping in terms of tracing as well. So if we can use this, I think we can open up with far greater confidence. I'm a bit surprised that there has not been an aggressive move on the attempt to extend the level of testing to apply to people, especially proactively.
And Khun Abhisit, out of this pandemic, how do you think the global politics, I'd like to start from local politics first. How do you think local politics has been shaken by this COVID-19, and how does it will affect on leadership and policy on public health security in the future?
Well, the last couple of days, I saw a story about the leading coalition party having internal problems. That suggests to me that the domestic politics hasn't moved much despite the pandemic. And I also see, looking at the reactions of people to government measures, that you can clearly detect that the division in Thai politics remains there and remains deep. So I think once the pandemic is resolved, I still don't see much of a shift in terms of political behavior.
I see.
Global politics is also a very interesting challenge, because I think the President of the United States appears determined to hold China accountable, according to his his narrative anyway. And that's likely to increase tension between the superpowers that were there before anyway with the trade war.
So that will
No,
mean
visit back to local politics, right? Early this month, you put forth a 9-point suggestion to the government on how the situation should be dealt with. And one of the points was that the government should sit down with the opposition to talk about joint efforts to deal with the pandemic. But your suggestion, this particular point, hasn't really struck the right chord with the government, as you can see, right? The opposition has been trying in vain to have an extraordinary House session, but there's been no positive response from the government. So how do you see this situation?
Yeah, well, that's probably not my biggest concern out of the 9 points. I think the testing I mentioned already. The second one, which is more important to me, is this issue of not using the principle of income guarantees, or basic income support, which would really simplify the whole issue of helping people who are suffering economically. I think that's a missed opportunity. But this very point about cooperation with politicians, personally, I think it's also a missed opportunity. I think it would have been a very, very good and strong signal to the Thai people that somehow, all sides would get together. If only maybe the Prime Minister sends an invitation letter to the leader of the opposition, which I'm sure he would not refuse a meeting, at least to agree upon the executive decrees that will need to be passed, and the government taking on board any kind of observations and valid comments and criticisms on how they might handle things better. As it is, we're back to the sort of bickering about whether we should be opening Parliament, and when Parliament opens anyway on 22nd of May, I still don't sense that we get that new atmosphere of cooperation.
So that means that if you were still in the government house, you would do this. You would invite the opposition leaders. To sit down with you.
Definitely. I think I would invite invite the opposition leader. In fact, even before issuing the executive decrees, because I think one of the other things that the government should have done more was to reallocate the existing budget for both this and the next fiscal year before deciding to take on a loan.
And economically, how do you see this impact will have consequence on Thai population as a whole from this COVID-19?
Well, already, I think there's been a huge amount of suffering and so much uncertainty for so many people who've lost their jobs or opportunities at doing business. The problem, as I mentioned before, is we continue to be in an area, in an atmosphere of still much uncertainty as we move ahead. How long we have to keep the restrictions, or even if we ease restrictions, will the new standards about distancing, face masks, and other practices will continue to apply. So it's extremely difficult for everybody economically, which is why I think it's important to have a good system of communications, two-way communications, and the flexibility to adjust the measures according to the situation. It's good that the government is delegating or decentralizing some of the decisions to the provinces. I think that will help many areas to respond to the needs of the local people better.
You have touched upon global politics just a little bit. And do you see the world order will be rearranged after COVID-19? And what's the superpower position like China and the US? What's your take?
Well, there's already a lot of analysis. I think much of it is still premature, partly because we don't really know how it's all going to play out. I think maybe only Sweden begins to talk more openly about herd immunity, which may not even exist, because there is still much debate about the issue of immunity and reinfection with this new virus. So we don't yet know how it's going to play out. Some people obviously feel that because China has now maybe emerged from the crisis, she will be in a much stronger position vis-a-vis the Western powers And that appears to be the case. But as I said, the leader of the US is determined to not allow that kind of trend to continue by trying to discredit and again, engage in some kind of at least war of words with China on the who should be accountable or responsible for the pandemic.
So would it be opportunity for ASEAN to rise after this?
Well, there is opportunity for ASEAN and for Thailand coming out of this. I think for Thailand in particular, I think we have proved to the world that we do have quite a robust health system. And we can therefore be a safe destination when recovery comes. And my expectation is certainly the Chinese market, as far as tourism is concerned, is appealing in the sense that they can come back earlier than other countries, and they probably would be looking to Thailand as one of the first destinations. As far as ASEAN is concerned, I know that there's been a summit and an agreement on the possibility of increasing cooperation. I just wish that it could be more concrete and more focused. I think one of the issues that would be of interest is, especially if we talk about the vaccines, is people now just look at the date when the vaccine will be approved or be available. But the next difficult step is, will we have the capacity to produce the amount of vaccines that will be needed globally? And how will allocation take place? I would personally, if ASEAN would direct the cooperation now to ensure that there will be some kind of manufacturing base for vaccines or drugs or treatments that might become available in ASEAN, which could be shared. I think that would be a great step to take that will help ensure that there will be some comfort from, when we recover, that ASEAN has its own base of production for these very essential goods and services.
If ASEAN countries do try to come up with the joint efforts you just talked about, do you think these countries, the ASEAN countries, will have the capability, to produce the vaccine we need in that vast volume?
Well, as far as for instance, the medical profession, I think not just in Thailand, but other countries in ASEAN, we've been recognized as having some of the brightest and the best as well. And as I understand it, there are already some people engaged in the research process. And there's no reason why ASEAN could not be one of the production bases for these essential goods.
And Kun Abhisit, we all know
but
that
we need coordination, and we need investment, and we need commitment.
Yeah. And we need leadership, first of all. I think that's what the
yes.
ASEAN is still lacking.
Kun Abhisit, we know that you are a classmate of UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Did you convey any words of encouragement or support to him?
I tweeted when he was hospitalized. I haven't tweeted with his new son being announced today.
Yeah.
So he's been through quite colorful times, even by his own standards.